Okay, so the recording has started. I would like to introduce you to Carly Tonks and Andrew Fuller. Carly is originally from Elwood City and has a Bachelor's of Science degree from the Clarion University. For the last 2 years, Carly has been a prevention intervention specialist at the Prevention Network. Carly has worked with multiple school districts in Beaver County, providing prevention services in classroom, group, and individual settings. Carly is currently acting as Class Academy's full-time prevention intervention specialist. And outside of work, Carly loves spending time with her husband and son. They love doing anything outside and exploring new places. Promoting mental wellness in her professional life as well as in her personal life is something that is very important to her. Andrew is originally from Hopewell Township. Andrew has a Bachelor of Arts degree from Penn State University with a minor in video production. For the last 2 years, Andrew has been the manager of projects and development for the Prevention Network and Class Academy. He has worked closely not only with Class Academy faculty and students, but with multiple school districts throughout Beaver County. He is currently working diligently to introduce the Student Assistant Program database, the Prevention Shield across all districts in the county. Outside of work, he loves spending time with his family, especially his wife and daughter. They enjoy traveling, movies, and look forward to weekly family game nights. He also enjoys encouraging and promoting the importance of mental health and wellness in all aspects of life. So I'm going to turn it over to Andrew and Carly.
Thank you very much, Stacy. Good afternoon, everyone. First of all, we would like to thank you all for being here today to listen to this presentation, as well as thanking the staff and students of CCBC and Stacy Freeman for having us. Today, we're going to be discussing topics such as mental health, mental wellness, and diving into that. But first, I want to make sure while I'm speaking now in the introduction that everyone did have the opportunity to scan the QR code or go to the menti.com to make sure you enter that for the interactive training. Now, when I'm thinking of mental health and mental wellness, I'm kind of glad that we did this during the springtime because spring, you think new, spring cleaning, spring forward. So we would like you to kindly spring ahead with us spring into mental wellness with us. Now, Stacy had introduced us, but my name is Andrew Fuller, and I am the Manager of Projects and Development at the Prevention Network and Class Academy. And my coworker is Carly Tonks as well. She works at Class Academy and the Prevention Network. During today's discussion, we're going to be discussing mental health. We're going to define it, what that is, what that looks like, what triggers are of mental health, defining triggers and what that means, the effects of mental health, not only for you personally, but also through your family, your community, and the world. We'll look at stigmas that surround mental health and define that, as well as mental wellness and self-care. The first part of this presentation was going to be interactive with that Mentimeter, so I'm going to turn it over to Carly now and let her walk you through your first activity of the day. Carly? Carly, I think you're on mute still.
Sorry, you would think after 2 years of doing this, I would learn to be off mute. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to play a game. It's myth or fact. A little subtitle is going to come up on your screen through the Mentimeter. You're then going to decide if it's myth or if it's a fact. You're going to follow along right on your phone, and you'll be able to click right on the screen if you're choosing myth or if you're choosing fact. The first one is personality weakness or character flaws cause mental health problems. You're going to click if you think that's a myth or a fact. Personality weakness or character flaws cause mental health problems. Myth or fact? Give you a couple seconds. That is actually a myth. Mental health problems have nothing to do with being weak. Many factors contribute to mental health, including biological factors, genes, physical illness, injury or brain chemistry, life experiences such as trauma or history of abuse, and family history of mental health problems. All right, so our next one. Once you are diagnosed with mental health condition, you can recover. Sorry. Mental health problems have nothing to do with being weak. Many factors contribute to mental health. Myth or fact? So like we said earlier, that one was myth. Mental health problems have nothing to do with being weak. Once you are diagnosed with a mental health condition, you can recover. Myth or fact? That one is a fact. Just like with mental and physical illness, such as diabetes or asthma, mental health conditions can be successfully treated and managed. People with mental health conditions can get better and many recover completely. All right, people with mental health conditions, even those who are managing their condition, cannot tolerate the stress of a job. Do you think it's myth? Do you think it's fact? That was a myth. People with mental health problems are just as productive as other employees. Employers who hire people with mental health conditions report good attendance and punctuality, as well as motivation and good work. When employees with mental health conditions receive effective treatment, it can result in lower total medical costs, increased productivity, and decreased disability costs. So that one was a myth. The last one of our myth and fact is mental health conditions are preventable. That is a fact. Prevention of mental, emotional, and behavioral disorders focuses on addressing known risk factors such as exposure to trauma that can affect the chances that children, youth, and young adults will develop mental health conditions. Promoting the social emotional well-being of children and youth leads to higher overall productivity, better educational outcomes, lower crime rates, stronger economics, lower healthcare costs, and improved quality of life.
Thank you, Carly. So now we're going to jump into the real crux of the presentation. What is mental health? Mental health includes our emotional, psychological, and social well-being. It affects how we think, feel, and act. It also helps determine how we handle stress and relate to others. So when we're looking at our mental health, we have to define the difference between the conditions or a mental illness. So what mental health conditions are common, but they often go unseen. Adults ages 18 or older reported experienced mental health conditions during the previous year, especially with the pandemic going on. 1 in 5 American adults experience a mental health condition every year, and 1 in 25 lives live with a serious mental illness. Now we will define the difference between a mental health condition versus a mental health illness. The condition is any mental health behavior or emotional disorder that impacts one's life daily. This can be something such as the generalized anxiety disorder, depression, eating disorders, PTSD or post-traumatic stress disorder, or OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder. A mental illness, on the other hand, is a mental behavioral or emotional disorder resulting in serious functional impairment, which substantially interferes with or limits one or more of the major life activities. This includes schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, severe depression, or severe depression compulsive disorder. So what are the triggers of mental health? We hear the word trigger a lot in our society. So what is a trigger? Sometimes referred to as a stressor, it is an action or a situation that can lead to an adverse emotional reaction. In the context of mental illness, it's referring to triggers usually that means something that has brought on or worsened the person's symptoms. So we're going to take another Menti break here. Carly's going to take over, and you're going to answer some of the questions for her regarding triggers.
All right, so there's a lot of different things that can be possible triggers. When you get to your phone and your Menti is up, I want you to answer the question in any words that you have. It has to be under 250 characters, though. What are many different stimuli that can be possible triggers, and what are some examples of triggers? Maybe in your personal life, Maybe you've seen coworkers do it. Maybe you've seen your friends have different triggers. What are some possible triggers, and what are some examples of specific triggers that people might have? I'll give us a couple more seconds. All right, so all of these are really good. I like to think of possible triggers being separated into three main groups. So we have personal triggers, we have family triggers, and we have community triggers. What are personal triggers? Personal triggers are anything that happens to us personally. So they might be increased risk of chronic illness. 70% of those diagnosed with a mental health condition also experiences a comorbid illness such as obesity or diabetes. For nearly 40 years, mental health conditions have been the second most common cause of disability in the United States, and 19% of people with mental health issues also have substance and misuse issues. Another trigger might be family. What does family mean? At least 8.4 million Americans care for a loved one with mental or emotional health issue. 15 to 23% of children live with a parent with a mental condition. Those are all triggers. The last little component of triggers might be in your community. 20% of people experience homelessness, also have a serious mental illness. 1 in 8 U.S. emergency department visits are related to mental and substance abuse disorders, and only 43% of American adults with a mental health condition and 64% of serious mental health illnesses receive treatment.
Thank you, Carly. Some of the other effects of mental health as we see in every day due to what has been underlying with the pandemic, we know that some of these are even more so now as opposed to several years ago when we were not entering into post-COVID world. So we are all still learning how to deal with the effects of the mental health, especially personally. So there is a certain stigma around mental health. So in order to talk about stigmas, we have to define it. So a stigma is a mark of disgrace associated with a particular circumstance, quality, or a person. So what are some of the harmful effects of stigma surrounding mental health? It can reduce hope for the person, lower self-esteem, increase psychiatric symptoms. They may have difficulty with social relationships, reduce the likelihood of staying with treatment, or even more so, having difficulties at work. How do we address the stigma of mental health? The one thing that we can all do is talk openly about it. Talk about it through social media, share it with your friends. Know that it's not something bad to talk about. More and more celebrities we see now are openly discussing their struggles with mental health, which has started to become a topic in everyday discussion. This also promotes, the stories of recovery and hope, and they are very impactful to those who are continuing to struggle with the stigma around mental health. Stigma of mental health and the media. Let's let the media know that they are using stigmatizing language, presenting stories of mental illness in a stigmatizing way. This means looking down on people that may have a mental health illness or a mental health condition. Choose the empowerment over shame. One of the quotes that we found from someone responding to a question on Facebook, the quote that stuck with us was, "I fight stigma by choosing to live an empowered life. To me, that means owning my life and my story and refusing to allow others to dictate how I view myself and how I feel about myself." And that was Val Fletcher responding to a Facebook question on how do you fight the stigmas that are around mental health. So this is probably one of my favorite sections here because it's focusing on mental wellness. What is mental wellness? The World Health Organization defines mental wellness as a state of well-being in which the individual realizes his or her own abilities and can cope with the mental stresses of life and can work productively and fruitfully and is able to make the contribution to his or her community. So what does that mean, and what does that not mean? It does mean having positive characteristics that allow you to thrive even at times during stress, including such as the pandemic, as I had mentioned. It allows us to have the internal process that helps us to think, feel, and connect and function. It's an active process that allows us to build that resilience, grow, and flourish. And it is important to know that if you have neglected your mental wellness in the past, it is never too late to take the steps to make the improvements. You can learn to better handle stressful situations. So what does this not mean? It means that there is not an absence of mental health issues. You're just learning how to cope with the diagnoses that you may have. A huge talking piece that we use is also about self-care. So what is self-care? It's a multidimensional, multifaceted process of purposeful engagement and strategies that promote healthy functioning and enhance your well-being. There are some reason that in our society, it is not okay to practice self-care. We may have the myths that surround that self-care is only for people struggling with mental health, or self-care is the same for everyone. This is definitely not the case. Everyone's self-care will look different. Mine may look very different from yours, or Carly's, or Stacy's. We all practice self-care in a different way that is able to help us with our internal mental health and external mental health struggles. The next section that we're going to go on to is more Mentimeters. So I'm going to turn it back over to Carly again so she can walk you through the next activities that are going to help you with your self-care and your mental wellness.
All right, so one of my favorite self-care things that I like to do is called grounding. You might have heard of grounding in the past. You might have seen grounding in a book. Grounding posts are all over Facebook right now because it's getting really popular. I also see a lot of grounding TikToks, which are really cool because that means that people in the younger generation are learning them as well. Grounding helps you get through a high stressor in your life, and that can be anything. Some stressful things that we do every day we don't even realize are super stressful. Maybe waiting in line in a grocery store, or waiting for something at an amusement park. Maybe walking into work and your desk is a mess because someone came in and cleaned it for you the day before. Stress happens every single day. Stress happens in our personal lives. Stress happens in our employment. Stress happens at work. Stress happens at school. Stress happens everywhere. Sometimes it's avoidable and sometimes it's not. Grounding is one of those strategies that you can use no matter where you are. You can use it at the park. You can use it at your house. You can use it in the car. So grounding makes you stop focusing on the things that are stressing you, and it focuses on the way that you're reacting to things. I like to tell people you can't change the way that other people are acting. You can't change situations you're in, but you can change the way that you are acting upon them. So grounding is a 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1 idea. So it is finding 5 things that you can see. It's seeing 4 things you can touch. It is 3 things you can hear. It's 2 things you can smell, and it's 1 thing you can taste. So it's using your 5 senses. There's 5 things you can do. You can see, you can touch, you can hear, you can taste, and you can smell. So right now, off the top of my head, 5 things that I see in my room. I see my laptop, I see my desk, I see my chair, I see a plant, I see a water bottle, and I could go on and on and on. But those 5 things are things I can see. 4 things I can touch. I can touch my fingers, I can touch my desk, I can touch my pen, and I can touch my water bottle. 3 things I can hear right now. I can hear myself talking. I can hear the humming of the heater. And 1 more thing I can hear is the swivel of the chair whenever I move it side to side. 2 things I can smell right now. I can smell they just painted this room I'm in, so I can smell the residue of paint, and I can smell the things that were cooked for lunch for the school. And 1 thing I can taste right now is I was chewing bubblegum, so I can taste the residual effects of the bubblegum. So using your senses, I want you guys to come up with 5 things you can see, 4 things you can touch, 3 things you can hear, 2 things you can smell, and 1 thing you can taste. So what are, and around you, when you're doing this, you want to actually be touching these 5 things. You want to actually stop and listen to the 3 things. I want you to actually see the 5 things. I want you to smell the 2 things. I want you to taste the 1. So our 5, what are 5 things you can see? Go ahead and look around your room and 5 things that you can see. So again, I can see my computer. I can see a fake plant, I can see a water bottle, I can see my notebook, and I can see a pen. Those are my 5 things. What are your 5 things that you can see? So if you can put those 5 things you see, put them in the chat. What are 5 things you can see? Again, mine are notebook, fake plant, water bottle, laptop, and pen. What are 5 things you can see? I'm going to open up the chat. We'll see if anyone's put theirs in. Five things you can see in the chat. All right. So Jocelyn sees a sticky note, a whale figure, a check, papers, and a ponytail. That's awesome. 5 things you can see. You always want to start with the 5 things you can see because you see a lot more things than you can taste. That's why I always start with 5 things you can see. We are going to move to 4th. Oh, we got another one. Lorraine said that she can see her computer, her calculator, her pen, her plant, and her mug. And we'll do one more. A coffee mug, a phone, a pen, headphones, business cards. So those are all good. 5 things you can see. What are 4 things you can touch? 4 things you can touch. So for me, I can touch my desk, I can touch my water bottle, I can touch my phone, and I can touch a pen. What are 4 things right now that you can touch? Go ahead and put them in the chat. And while you're putting in the chat, make sure that you're actually touching these things. So I can touch my desk, I can touch my water bottle, I can touch my pen, and I can touch my phone. Put it in the chat, the 4 things that you can touch. So we have a hair, phone, grass, and watch, a desk, cell phone, tablet, calendar, a dog, a chair, computer, and a phone, and a blanket, laptop, keyboard, cell phone, and Xbox controller. So 4 things you can touch. All right, now we're going to do 3 things you can hear. This one's really cool because if you actually stop what you're doing and listen, you can hear a lot more than what you think you can. So right now, I can hear my voice talking. I can hear my coworker rocking in their chair, and I can hear heels walking down the hallway. So what are 3 things that you hear right now? Take a minute. I'm going to stop talking so you can actually really dig deep and listen to 3 things going on around you. When you have your 3 things going on, go ahead and type it in the chat box. So give yourself time to think of 3 things that you can hear. Three things you can hear. Jocelyn has, oh, I'm sorry, your computer's struggling with this video. I have a video, an airplane and cars outside, cars driving, wind, and your breathing. Your breathing's a really good one because that's something that you can always hear and you might not realize it. The sink running, coworkers talking, and the sound of typing on the keyboard. And then we have birds chirping, neighbors talking outside, and wind. Now I want you to think of 2 things that you can smell. What are 2 things that you can smell right now? I can smell lunch that was made for the kids because I'm currently in a school, and I can smell the fresh paint on the walls. What are 2 things that you can smell right now? Put it in the chat. Fresh air in your shampoo, that's a good one. Your lunch and a scented candle, hand sanitizer and air, an air freshener and hand lotion, coffee and hand sanitizer. So those are all things you can smell. And now I want you to think of 1 thing you can taste. What is 1 thing you can taste? So for me, right before I started this presentation, I was chewing bubblegum. I can taste the bubblegum effect still in my mouth. What is 1 thing you can taste? And go ahead and put it in the chat. Leftover mint, Fritos, milk, water. All right, so in summary, I love grounding techniques. I could talk about them all the time because it's something that you can do no matter where you are. anytime you're stressed, anytime you're anxious, anytime you're somewhere where you don't want to be. I even like to use grounding techniques if I am trying really hard to pay attention in a presentation and I just find it really, really boring. I can stop and I can do any type of grounding activity. So in summary, a grounding technique is using your 5 senses to get you to focus on things happening that you can control instead of the things that you cannot control. So the 5 things you can see, 4 things you can touch, 3 things you can hear, 2 things you can smell, and 1 thing you can taste. So if you're ever in a situation where you feel really stressed or really anxious, use these grounding techniques. They're super fun and they're super easy, and you'll be able to find different things you can see and hear and smell in the different areas that you go. All right, so our next thing we're going to talk about is boundaries. Boundaries are defined as rules or limits that someone establishes to protect their security and well-being around others. Boundaries are really important to talk about when we are talking about mental health and mental wellness and self-care, because a lot of us don't really have boundaries. Who wakes up in the morning, does whatever they're going to do, and takes whatever happened that night before to maybe school with them or maybe work with them. Maybe you were running late to class and you get to class and then you're flustered your whole class because you spent your time that you normally do drinking your coffee running around like a chicken with its head cut off. Boundaries is making that when I get to work, I get to school, I'm going to stop at the door and I'm going to drop all of that behind me. So boundaries can be boundaries that you make for yourself. It can be that you make them for your work. It could be so you make them for your friends. Maybe some things you talk to your friends about, you don't talk to about with your coworkers. Maybe something that you keep to yourself, you wouldn't share with your friends. So it's really important to find where our boundaries are. And maybe we don't have any boundaries, but we want to start making those boundaries so we can focus more on ourselves and our well-being. So I have some questions for you. When I ask you a question, I want you to put either myself, family or friends, or acquaintances in the box, in the chat box, and you'll see what I mean. So my first question I have for you is, who would you share your weight with? Would you share your weight, like how much you weigh? Would you share that number with just yourself? Would you share that number with your family or friends? Or would you share that number with your acquaintances? Who would you share the number on the scale when you step on into the doctor's? Who would you share your weight with? Yourself? Only myself? And some people's boundaries might be different. So Lorraine said myself, but Jocelyn said friends. Jackson said acquaintances. Elaine said only myself. Some things, Amanda said she doesn't even like to share that with herself. I totally agree with that. Each person sets their own boundaries. Each person is going to share something with just themselves that somebody else might share with acquaintances. But that's really important because that's showing you what is important to you. So if you're sharing your weight with only yourself, that's totally okay. But if you're sharing your weight with your acquaintances, that's okay too. It's finding where you set that boundary. My next question I have for you is, who would you share with if you got in trouble with the law? You got in trouble, you did something, and now you have to go to court. Something happened. Who would you share that information with? Would you tell just yourself? Would you tell your family and friends? Or would you tell your acquaintances? Write it in the chat box. Jackson would share it with her family and friends. Amanda would do family and close friends. Elaine, only my husband. Renee, parents and husband. Only family. So did your boundary for this change? Maybe you had that you would share your weight with only yourself, but maybe if you got in trouble with the law, you might spread that boundary out to family and friends. Did your boundary change or did your boundary stay the same? It's okay, either way. Each person sets their own boundaries for things. My next question for you is, who would you share your age with? Would you share your age with just yourself? Would you share your age with family and friends, or would you share your age with acquaintances? Go ahead and type it in the chat. So most people are saying they would share their age with anyone or just or acquaintances, which is probably different than who you would share your weight with and who you would share if you got in trouble with. Because again, different questions, different things cause different boundaries. The last question I have for you is, who would you tell, maybe you have a child, who would you tell if your child got in trouble with the law? Put it in the chat box. Who would you tell if your child got in trouble with the law? Would you share that information with just yourself? Would you share that information with your family and friends? And would you share that information with acquaintances? Some people said myself. Renee said parents and husband. Amanda said my husband. Now, did that change? Did your boundary for who you would share with if you got in trouble with the law by yourself change from if you would share if your child got in trouble with the law? Do you put yourself on a bigger standard than you put your child? So regardless of who you put in your boundaries in all of these questions, I want you to look at your responses. And most of you put that you would only share most of this information with yourself and with your family and friends, right? The only question that I think most of you put acquaintances for was your age. So if you're only sharing this really important stuff with yourself and with your close family and your close friends, who do you spend your most time with? Because I know for me, if you ask me any of those questions, most of my answers would be myself or my family and friends. But I spend a lot more time with my coworkers and at work than I do with my family and friends. How can I make that boundary? Yes, regardless of what I do, I have to go to work for 40 hours a week because I have to get paid and I have to do my job that way. But if I'm not sharing all of this really important information with acquaintances, which is where I would put my coworkers. I love my coworkers, but I would put them at acquaintances. I wouldn't put them at family and friends. If I'm sharing all of this information with myself and my close family and friends, then I should be able to leave my work at work. And maybe you don't work, maybe you're in school. You should be able to leave your school work at school. Again, you're going to have homework, and I totally understand that. And having homework is a stressor that we can't get away with. But you making that boundary that says, I'm not going to spend every waking moment with my schoolwork or at my job. I'm going to make time for myself. That is self-care. Having boundaries is really, really important, especially when it comes to making time for my mental health, making time for my mental wellness, and making time for my self-care. You should set boundaries so you have time to do those things. All right, and we are going to go back to the mentee now. This is my favorite mentee. We're just going to do a really quick mental health check-in. So using an emoji, I want you to pick an emoji that goes along with one of these hearts. So if you pick a red heart, then that means you're doing really great. If you have an orange heart, that means I'm doing pretty good. If I have a yellow heart, I'm doing okay. If I have a green heart, I'm starting to struggle. If I have a blue heart, I'm really having a hard time. And a purple heart, I need to reach out for support. So go ahead, using your mentee, I want you to do your mental check-in. How are you feeling right now? So we have a couple oranges, we have one red, we have one blue. We have another orange. So using that mental health check-in and using all of the things that me and Andrew talked about today, what are some things that could get you to get the really good red heart that everything is well and you are doing really well with your mental wellness? Or how can we improve our mental state? What are some things that we could use or do to make that better? Still have some rolling in, so we have a red heart again. I think that's all of our images.
All right, I want to thank you, Carly, for walking us through all of those techniques. I particularly love the grounding and the boundaries and the mental health check-in, and I'm so glad that we used that during this presentation to give everyone that opportunity, as you said, to take a look at what they can do to use as boundaries to check in with their mental health and just really take a look at what could they do in their office, as you said, or in their classroom to just ground themselves and make sure that they are okay, because it's okay to check in. In review, we're going to take, we talked about today mental health. We defined it and took a look at what a mental health condition is versus a mental illness. We talked about some of the triggers and what they can do as stressors to add to our lives. We took a look at the effects of the mental health, whether it be personal, how it affects us through our family, our community, and the world, especially with everything that is happening around the world today. We define the stigma and what the stigma is and the negative connotations around mental health and how we can help break those stigmas, whether it be via social media or the media or just with family and friends, getting to know someone that does have a mental health condition or a mental illness to learn how to break that stigma and truly understand what that person is going through. And finally, again, my most favorite part, we looked at mental wellness and self-care. I cannot stress enough how important it is to just take care of yourself to check in. I know some people are afraid due to their work or school or circumstances, but again, it is so important to just know yourself, know what you need, know your boundaries, and know what your mental awareness and mental health check-ins can be. It is okay to not be okay. I believe all of us have been hearing that, especially over the last 2 years, that if you need some help or you need some resources, that is okay. It is okay because your mental health and your mental wellness is important and it matters no matter what. So we want to thank you today for joining us and listening to us regarding the mental health presentation, resources, definitions. If anyone has any questions, comments, concerns, need anything at all, we are going to leave our emails in the chat box, or if you feel free to go ahead and ask us some questions, we can get back to you. We put a list of resources here around Beaver County, but also at the Prevention Network and Class Academy, we are more than happy to reach out and help you find some behavioral health resources around Beaver County. So if you have any questions, again, and concerns, just go ahead and pop those right into the chat. We'll answer whatever we can. If not, we want to thank you all, and especially, again, a special thank you to CCBC and Stacy Freeman for having us here today. We truly appreciate the opportunity to talk to you about mental health and mental wellness, and we look forward to many more of these discussions in the future.
I want to thank both you and Carly. It was a fantastic, very engaging presentation. If you have a question, you are free to pop that question in the chat box, or you can simply turn on your microphone and ask a question. Yeah, I agree, Lorraine. I don't know if you saw that, Andrew, in the chat box. Lorraine said, "Thank you. Great options to use with my students." Yeah, I think that's
Absolutely.
I mean, I particularly love the grounding part of it. I thought that was fantastic.
That is something that more people often don't know, that is truly a technique that everyone can use daily just to be able to help themselves, no matter what the situation may be. Just a simple technique that is able to be used daily.
Are there any questions before we wrap it up for today? Any questions? Okay, well, if there are no questions, I believe Andrew's typing his contact information in the chat box. So if you don't feel comfortable asking a question here, you can always reach out to Andrew and Carly through the information that they're posting in the chat box. Thank you so much for joining us today for this interactive presentation. And thank you again, Andrew and Carly. It's much appreciated.
Thank you very much, Stacy. We appreciate the opportunity as well.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.
I'll just leave those resources up for a few more minutes too, in case anyone needs them. If not, we can always reach out again if anyone needs any of the contact information.
We are also hosting a speaker series here at the Prevention Network. We have our first speaker on April 22nd. It's going to be at Class Academy or at the Prevention Network. Brian Mendler is coming to talk, and he is a phenomenal spokesman. So if you're around and you would like to come, you can get tickets. If you go to our Facebook page, you will see the link to buy the tickets.